What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. Today, we're going to be continuing our series of miss or make the playoffs, and this time we're going to be talking about the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets have been one of the most surprising teams this year, but unfortunately, in the last stretch of this hockey season, the Winnipeg Jets have been very inconsistent. Yes, they are second place in terms of their penalty kill, but in terms of goals scored, they're only 21st in the league. And you look at the roster with the likes of Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Nino Niederreiter with at the trade deadline, Nikolai Ehlers, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Blake Wheeler, Vladislav Namestnikov, Adam Lowry, Mason Appleton. You know, that's a pretty solid top nine. You would expect a lot more goals from them, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Paul Maurice, he decided to leave the Winnipeg Jets last year in a very bad state. They stripped Blake Wheeler of the captaincy during the offseason. They brought in Rick Bowness. There was rumors about Pierre-Luc Dubois wanting out of Winnipeg and wanted to join his, hometown team, which is the Montreal Canadiens. So there was a lot of negativity towards the Winnipeg Jets and a lot of change in the locker room. So no one knew what to expect with the Winnipeg Jets. But, they come in this season and Pierre-Luc Dubois is playing like an absolute superstar. Everyone is playing fantastic, and they were surprising. They were one of the top teams for the longest time in the season, but recently they've been dropping a lot of important games, and they're giving the likes of Nashville Predators and the Calgary Flames a lot more hope. That they could potentially make the playoffs. So the Winnipeg Jets really need to hold on together and go back to basics and what they were doing for majority of the season, because they could potentially lose their playoff spot that they worked so hard for throughout the season.
Yeah, well, I think just talking about the Jets a little bit. I mean, obviously they've struggled at times this season. They just they were on a 5 game losing streak not too long ago. Lately in their last 10, they're about 5-5 in their last 10, so they're about 500. They've had games where they've dropped some games to teams that they probably should have beaten in the likes of the St. Louis Blues and the San Jose Sharks in overtime. But they've also beaten the teams that they're supposed to beat in Nashville and Florida and Tampa, although those are Eastern Conference team, and even the likes of the Edmonton Oilers as well in that 7-5 win. What's interesting about the Winnipeg Jets, though, and it's funny you mention it because as much as they're battling with Nashville and Calgary, Winnipeg can take a real advantage here in their playoff hopes. They beat Arizona 2-1 yesterday. And then since then, now they're playing Anaheim tomorrow on the 23rd. Then they play LA and then they play San Jose. Those are three games where, you know, honestly, they can probably get at least 6 points. No, probably get at least 4 points out of the 3 games that are there. The only game they probably would lose was against LA, but they could beat Anaheim and they could beat San Jose. And then in the month of April, or the last game of March is against Detroit. And then in the month of April, they play Calgary and Nashville to finish off their year before playing San Jose, Minnesota, and Colorado. So Winnipeg have opportunities here to kind of take advantage of their playoff chances and push themselves to the finish line in the playoffs. But they also have two big games in April against Calgary and Nashville that could potentially be playoff deciding matchups for them. So it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back and how they're able to do down the stretch. They don't have many injuries. They only really have two in Sam Gagne and Cole Perfetti. Cole Perfetti's been out since February, and he probably won't be back at least until the first round of the playoffs. So there's that to worry about. However, if you look at the Winnipeg Jets, it's been very interesting in terms of the point totals. Kyle Connor's had a point per game season with 27 goals, 46 assists, 73 points in 72 games. However, he's a minus 11. Josh Morrissey is basically a point per game, 15 goals, 54 assists, 69 points in 70 games, so just under. And then Mark Scheifele's got 38 goals, 23 assists, 61 points in 72 games. Pierre-Luc Dubois has got 56 points, including 24 goals, 32 assists in 64 games. And Blake Wheeler has 50 points in 63 games with 15 goals, 35 assists. The interesting part about the Winnipeg Jets is a lot of their top players are minus players, right? Mark Scheifele, we all know how bad defensively he is. Blake Wheeler -5, Nick Ehlers -4, Kyle Connor -11, Josh Morrissey -2, which isn't that bad. But defensively, we know that the Winnipeg Jets have always struggled on that aspect of the game, and it looks like, at least their top guys haven't been able to help them out defensively. And what's interesting about the Winnipeg Jets is if you go and look at their stats in general in the NHL, they're 21st in the league in goals forward and 11th in the league in goals against, which is actually kind of funny because what essentially that means is that they're not scoring enough goals, but they're also not playing well enough defensively in the sense where a lot of their wins have come from their goaltending. And more importantly, Connor Hellebuck, who's got a 918 save percentage, 3 shutouts, 31 wins, 22 losses, and 2 overtime losses. He's been spectacular this season. And the big reason as to why the Winnipeg Jets are there is because, yeah, they're getting scoring from their big guys, probably not from their depth, but Connor Hellebuck has stood on his head when he's needed to. And, David Riddick's got a 902, no shutouts, 265 goals against average, but he's got 9 wins, 7 losses, 1 overtime loss. So he hasn't been spectacular, David Riddick, but he also hasn't been terrible for them either. So I think what's interesting about the Jets here is that they're reliant a lot on their top guys, and their top guys have performed offensively. But I think it's going to be a situation where coming into the playoffs, are they going to be able to get depth scoring from guys like Morgan Barron, from guys like Sam Gagne, Axel Johnson Felvey, Nino Niederreiter, who, considering in 12 games played this year, he's got 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points with the Jets since arriving. And Nemesnikov's got 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points with the Jets since arriving as well. Those two guys have played a factor for the Jets too in their arrivals and have played well. If they can get those guys continuing to go, then I think their depth might be good. But if they don't and they're reliant on their top guys to score goals, it might be a struggle for them in the playoffs. And I know people might disagree with me on that, but I look at it this way. Winnipeg's always been a team that's, had a really good offensive core, and it just hasn't been able to put it all together. And I think that now, seeing how well Connor Hellebuck has played and seeing how well Josh Morrissey has played, and even to some extent, the top guys that they've had, and adding guys like Niederreiter and Nemesnikov, I'm optimistic in what Winnipeg can do, not only to end the regular season, but also get into the playoffs and potentially do some damage. And I know that their struggles haven't been at their best. They haven't always been at their best this season, especially lately. But I don't think it's a cause for concern just yet. If they start losing to the Ducks and they start losing to San Jose, and teams like Nashville start catching up to them, and Calgary starts winning some games, we may have a different cause for concern. But I don't think that it's something that Jets fans should be worried about. I think the Winnipeg will make the playoffs. It's going to be it's going to be interesting to see who they potentially face in the playoffs. But I think the Jets are going to get there. I think they have a favorable schedule. And I think they have some games that they can easily win and put themselves in the race and secure themselves a playoff spot, at least till the end of the year. So,
Yeah, and I totally agree with most of your points. The Winnipeg Jets are pretty comfortable at where they are at the moment, but at the same time, like you were saying, the last 10 games, very up and down. Winnipeg needs to get back to what made them so successful and such a surprising team this season. And, just giving hope to teams like Calgary and Nashville could be fuel that could lead them to take down Winnipeg and get that wild card spot at the end of the season. And especially those two games that Winnipeg will face against Calgary and Nashville, those are going to be deciding factors potentially till at the end of the season, because I do believe that it's going to be a three-team race for that last spot until the end of the season, unless Seattle starts really dropping games left to right. But I highly doubt that's the case. I think Seattle will make the playoffs and finish first in the wild card spot. But Winnipeg, you know, it- out of these three teams, I would like to see Winnipeg go to the playoffs, because you don't know what's going to happen with Pierre-Luc Dubois past this season. You want to capitalize on having him on your team. He's a guy that you want to have on your team, despite him having interest in signing elsewhere. And Winnipeg being a surprising team for the most of this year and working so hard this season under the circumstances that they dealt with last year and during the offseason. A lot of people did not have Winnipeg making the playoffs, and I do believe that they earned themselves to make the playoffs, even though they've been slipping a little bit towards the end of the season. Not only that, a lot of people were not happy with Nemestikov and Nino Ryder being added. They wanted a bigger winger, like Patrick Kane, for example, or one of those high end talents traded to Winnipeg to strengthen their chances of winning the Stanley Cup. But giving up a fourth round pick for Nemestikov, who has 6 points in 10 games, 2 goals, and 4 assists, is really, really impressive work by Sheladeov. And not only that, Niederreiter, who only costed a second round pick, which was an absolute steal in my opinion. 7 points in 12 games, 4 goals, and 3 assists. Both players have had an immediate impact. Nemestikov playing fantastically on the third line, but also could move up in the top six if called upon, and Niederreiter fitting nicely in the top six. And when Cole Perfetti comes back come playoff time, because once he got injured, they said he was going to be out for a minimum of 8 weeks. They're going to have some extra firepower, and their offense is going to be a lot stronger. And on paper, if I have to choose between the Winnipeg Jets, Nashville Predators, and Calgary, I'm going to go with the Winnipeg Jets making the playoffs. We will get to the Calgary Flames and explain, how we feel about Calgary and the whole, season they've had, especially under the circumstances with the whole Kachuk for Huberto and Uyghur trade. But at the end of the day, I think Winnipeg's the most deserving out of those three teams. And Cal Connor, one of the most underrated snipers. Honestly, I would love to see him in the playoffs. Josh Morrissey has been a Norris caliber defenseman all year out. Mark Scheifele, when there was doubt in the offseason, saying that he might not be a part of the team, that he might be traded. He's having a fantastic season. Same thing goes for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Blake Wheeler, people are questioning his leadership skills. They stripped the C from him. He's having a bounce back year, 50 points in 63 games. Nikolai Ehlers, a very underrated player, missed a good chunk of the season, but 31 points in 36 games, almost a point per game player. Adam Lowry, someone who's very underrated in my opinion, playing third line minutes, 30 points in 72 games. Pretty impressive work there. And yes, I know there was talks about Winnipeg, not adding a defenseman, and yeah, they would have liked to add a defenseman and this and that, whatever. But at the end of the day, they played it safe. They said, we're comfortable with this team. They added two pieces that didn't cost that much. They were low risk, high rewards in terms of Nemestikov, and in terms of Niederreiter, one of the most underrated secondary scoring wingers in the league. And we saw that, with his time with Nashville Predators. He came out of the gates blazing for Nashville at the start of the season, and people were like shocked, like, "Oh my God, who is Niederreiter? This guy's existed this whole time." It's just that not a lot of people covered him, unfortunately. But I believe that Winnipeg will finish second in the wild card position, and they're gonna face the likes of either Dallas, Minnesota, Colorado, Vegas, Los Angeles, or Edmonton, because it's such a close race. It's going to be a battle to the finish, and these matchups could be interchangeable at this point.
Look, and if you look at, like, if the playoffs ended today, they would likely face Vegas in the first round, right? And I think that that's a really good test for Winnipeg, in the sense where I think that they can beat Vegas. I think that if you look at Winnipeg on paper, a lot of people don't give them, necessarily the credit, and I get it. Winnipeg hasn't necessarily proven in the playoffs. And I know that at the beginning of the video, I kind of shot on them a little bit for the fact that they're really offense heavy reliant, and they're reliant on their big guys. But to me, I look at Winnipeg and I see a lot of potential there, right? Kyle Connor's really good. We all know that Pierre-Luc Dubois, it looks like potentially his time in Winnipeg will come to an end at some point. But if you look at their top six, right? Just as an example, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Nino Niederreiter is your first line. Your second line is Blake Wheeler, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Nikolai Ehlers. And then your third line is Vladislav Nemesnikov, Adam Lowry, and Mason Appleton. Now, obviously, that changes once Cole Perfetti comes back into the lineup for the playoffs. But to me, that's a really good top nine. Like, I don't see a flaw in any of those top nine guys. I think that it's well balanced. I think you've got a mixture of everything on each line. And I think it's three lines that arguably can put the puck in the net. And then your fourth line, well, a speedy winger in Morgan Barron, Kevin Stenlund, who can do a little bit of everything, and Saku Manalainen, who's a good depth guy to have. It's a good fourth line. It's a fourth line that can really, potentially help you in the playoffs. So I think Winnipeg offensively have a good team. Then you look at their decor, and look, it is a bit weak, right? Josh Morrissey has taken a big load of Winnipeg this year and has done well in the position that he's in. Dylan DeMello's been a good D partner for him. I think those two guys have played well this season. Neil Pionk has struggled this season, right? And playing next to Brendan Dillon, It hasn't been the best for both of them. They haven't had terrible games. They've been okay, but it hasn't been necessarily at their best. It could have been nice to see them potentially go out and get a D partner for Neil Pionk, or potentially try to take off the load a little bit off Neil Pionk and potentially bring Brendan Dillon down to the third pair where he would have played with Nate Schmidt and have Kyle Capobianco as their seventh defenseman. Unfortunately, Cheveldayoff didn't do that, but I think their decor is a bit weak. I think it might be something that could potentially hurt them in the playoffs, especially if you're playing a team as good as Vegas. But like I said, and the biggest question and the biggest response to that is that Connor Hellebuck's been Connor Hellebuck, and if Connor Hellebuck can play the way he's capable of playing and being how good he is, the way he's been every single season for the Winnipeg Jets, the Jets have a chance, because at the end of the day, they've got an elite goaltender, they've got an elite forward core, and they've got a defense that I think can hold up for the time being, to help them at least get past the first, maybe even second round, and try to see if they can get to the conference final. It's going to be how far Connor Hellebuck's willing to take them, but it's also going to be a situation of, I believe the Jets are going to make the playoffs. It's going to be a question of how many goals are they going to get the offense from their top guys that they've lacked in recent years, right? If you look at their playoffs, a lot of the guys like Scheifele, a lot of the guys like Dubois, a lot of the guys like Wheeler, especially, have disappeared in the playoffs. Are these guys going to come in and be able to play and perform at the level that they have during the regular season? If the answer is yes, then the Jets are going to go far in the playoffs, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. But if these guys don't show up, it's going to be another season where they're going to have to rely on Hellebuck to bail them out of the playoffs, and they might lose games, 3-1, 3-2, and Hellebuck's going to keep them in it, but the Jets just won't put the puck in the net. So it depends on what Winnipeg team you're going to get. Obviously, those were under Paul Maurice. I think Rick Bowness is a good coach. I think he's done a good job so far this season with Winnipeg, and I'm optimistic about what the Jets can do moving forward. I'm going to be cheering for them in the playoffs, along with Edmonton, on the Canadian side of things, if both those teams make it in. But obviously, if Calgary makes it in as well, that'll be my other team that I'll be cheering for. But I want to see how good Winnipeg does. Although I don't really like Mark Scheifele as a player for obvious reasons, I still think that the Jets as a whole, I don't have a problem with, and I think that they're a good team and a well balanced team on paper.
Yeah, and my final thoughts are, Rick Bowness knows how to take a mediocre team to the Stanley Cup Finals. He did that with Dallas in the bubble. He maximized, his players to their full potential, and they got there. They were underdogs from the start to the finish, and I think the Winnipeg Jets could be that too heading into the playoffs. They're going to be serious underdogs, and not only that, but it all comes down to how they play defensively. If they don't play well defensively, which we saw in the past, that's been a major critique. They don't have the likes of Dustin Bufflin anymore, or Ben Sherratt, or all those top guys that they used to have, Jacob Chuba, on defense. They had one of the best defensive cores in the league once upon a time. But now with Connor Hellebuck, he is one of the best goalies in the league. He's proven that this year once again. But can he stand on his head if the defense is not playing on par to what they're supposed to? That's a thing that we have to take into consideration. And not only that, the West is up for grabs. Anything is possible. It's not like the East where it's going to be a complete bloodbath. Everything is pretty much even in the West, and it's going to be a hard fought battle till the end. But guys, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Who wins? Um, that last playoff spot. Is it going to be the Winnipeg Jets, Nashville, Calgary? Obviously, we're covering Winnipeg. We covered Nashville before, and our last video covering the miss or make the playoff series will be the Calgary Flames. And make sure to comment in the comment section below to share your thoughts. Like this video if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for watching.